Israel has long been a source of instability in the Middle East and around the world. The destruction of homes to make way for illegal settlements, assassinations, indiscriminate bombing of civilians, and an apartheid wall ripping apart Palestinian families and communities have come to define its very existence.
All this done in the name of Judaism, the oldest of the three Abrahamic religions. For years, Israel's overarching ideology of Zionism has been seen as synonymous with Judaism. But for an increasingly vocal and visible minority of Jews, Zionism represents an unjust perversion, both theologically and ethically.
To get a better understanding, I travelled up to Manchester to speak to Rabbi Aaron Cohen, the head of the Neturei Karta, Orthodox Jews opposed to Israel. According to his reading of Jewish scriptures, Jews are in a divinely imposed exile as a punishment for past disobedience to God and cannot establish a Jewish state until the return of the Messiah.
Part of the Judaism incorporates the idea of the Jewish people living in Palestine, but only subject to certain conditions. And conditions basically were that they had to maintain certain very high levels, ethical, religious, moral levels. And sadly, the desired standard was not maintained. And we were warned, it's all in our teachings, that if the standards are not maintained, then the Jewish people would be dispersed around the world in a form of divinely decreed exile.
That state of exile was observed until the British government, through the Balfour Declaration to Lord Rothschild, gave Palestine to the Zionists. Following World War II, Israel was established and millions of Palestinians were killed or driven out from their homes. To Rabbi Cohen, this is a violation of Jewish theology.
Our teaching is that this is a state of exile which we have to accept. Our job is to live as loyal citizens in whichever country in which we find ourselves. We are not allowed under any circumstances to try and fight against it and come out of this exile. This is considered a rebellion against the will of the Almighty. So our first opposition, main opposition, if you like, to Zionism is that on creed, on belief grounds. They're going against the teachings which have been handed down through thousands of years of generations.
According to Rabbi Cohen, his religious convictions also dovetail with a humanitarian disgust at the conduct of Israel.
This is a horrific contravention of humanitarian ideals, and part of the Jewish religion is to treat one's fellow man with compassion. So therefore, our opposition to Zionism is also on the grounds of total opposition to the way they've treated and carry on treating the Palestinian people.
Rabbi Cohen is perhaps one of the better-known faces of Jewish opposition to Israel, but I wanted to know about lesser-known Jewish activists from a more secular bent who have taken on a solidly anti-Zionist and pro-Palestinian position on the question of Israel. I went and spoke to Les Levidow from Jews for Boycotting Israeli Goods, who regularly call for sanctions to be levied on Israel. I wanted to know how his Jewish heritage influenced his politics.
At least in the branch of Judaism in which I grew up, the Reform branch, there was an emphasis on social justice. And in fact, perhaps our congregation was unusual that in the late 60s, it was incorporating texts from the US Civil Rights Movement into the text for the ceremonies.
Criticism of Israel is usually shot down with accusations of anti-Semitism. While this charge loses its potency the more it's used, it's also increasingly redundant, with a growing number of Jews involved in the anti-Zionist struggle.
Because Israel claims to be a Jewish state or state of the Jews, I have a special responsibility to get involved in that issue, regardless of whether I do so wearing some kind of Jewish hat. This accusation of anti-Semitism seemed to be proliferating, so it was important that a specific section or fraction of the Palestine Solidarity Movement include Jews as Jews countering these arguments. And of course, that didn't stop the Zionists because they have the ready-made slogan, self-hating Jew, and so on. But that makes them look a little ridiculous.
Naturally, taking such a stance meant that activists like Les face huge obstacles to their efforts from organized Jewish security organizations.
Whenever we turned up at an event where the Community Security Trust is doing the so-called security task, then anyone with dissident views comes under suspicion, and in some cases is even excluded from entering the meeting. This has happened with many activists, for example, those from the Jewish Socialist Group, when the Israeli embassy sponsored a public event at the Institute of Education on Israeli science and technology, especially, for example, water-saving technology for arid agriculture. Then Naomi and I attended, planning to ask a couple of questions, and within about a minute, or half a minute of me asking a question, these two thugs came along, one on each of my shoulders, and literally carried me out. The CST would act as if they were police, and there was some collusion with the police, at least turning a blind eye, or even giving a green light to the CST to act as if they're police, ordering people where they can and cannot go, and so on.
To Rabbi Cohen, the consequences have been even more dangerous, with his home coming under attack from Zionist groups.
There was a fire bomb. It was like a very powerful fire. The whole house is full of smoke. There's still the signs there, the black mark you see.
So these are a result of a firebomb?
Yeah, and
that's why you have
the fire people, he said, I have to, my postbox is blocked off. These are perspex sheeting over the window, which is brick-proof. If a brick fall, it goes against it. Otherwise, there was bricks going through my window, and air gun. I see all the scratches on it, but if you see, all the windows were smashed at one time. See this? Yeah. That's scratched on.
It's evident that to be a Jew and to stand against Israel and the ideology of Zionism comes at the expense of one's own personal safety. The more Israel commits human rights violations against the Palestinian people, the more the public will speak out, including members of the Jewish community. And when that happens, Israel's false sense of entitlement and legitimacy will be forever eroded. Eisa Ali for Reporters File.